Hi, my name is Aajonus Vonderplanitz. I'm going to introduce you to my work, which is called the Primal Diet. This is a very brief class here, so I will try to be as concise as possible. But I got into health about 41 years ago when I was dying of multiple cancers, multiple myeloma, which is cancer of blood and bone, stomach and lymphatic cancers. I had diabetes, psoriasis, angina pectoris, and bursitis, all incurable. And I was on my deathbed when a volunteer at the hospice introduced me to raw carrot juice and raw milk. And that began turning my situation around and reversed my diseases. Over a long period of time, there's no magic bullet that I found. You will have to set aside everything that you've ever learned to be even open to what I am going to tell you, to consider it as possibility. Most people believe that bacteria, virus, pathogens, fungus are all negative responses in the body to toxicity. However, I look at it very differently. I look at it as if the fungus, the bacteria, the parasites, and the virus are aids reversing disease. The toxicity enters the body, damages tissue, and then your body uses the bacteria, parasites, fungus, and virus to dissolve the dead tissue and to eliminate it. The bacteria and the parasites are the most important. The parasites can eat almost 100 times their weight in 24 hours and discard 1 to probably 3% waste product. So those are very efficient janitors. Imagine that, you being able to eat 100 pounds of food in a day and then discard in the feces 1 or 3 pounds of waste matter. That leaves your body very, very little to neutralize, to discard via the lymphatic activity. The bacteria can eat about probably 50 times their weight in 24 hours. They are very efficient. They produce a little bit more waste product, but still very efficient janitors. Molds, fungus, which are yeast infections and different kinds of funguses throughout the system. The mother of the fungus is called mycelium. And the mycelium can consume a great deal of the waste products also, but they have more waste product. The virus are not alive. We know that the fungus are alive, bacteria are alive, parasites are alive. Virus are not alive. They have no nucleus, they have no respiratory system, they have no digestive system. They are protein bodies which can either help the construction of something or dissolution. Most often viruses dissolve toxicity. 300,000 varieties of virus specific to particular tissue within a cell in each zone. And I will call intracellular zone, extracellular zone, and even the body as a zone. A gland can be a zone. Particular kind of virus is specific to a zone and a specific tissue within that zone. You won't be afraid of virus, even though they dissolve tissue. The body makes viruses to dissolve tissue. This is much misunderstood. A lot of people call them alive. The pharmaceutical industry would love for you to believe that they're alive and that they multiply erratically, uncontrolled, and of course you'll go for medication to try to stop it. And the same thing probably believe about parasites and bacteria and fungus. A virus will change every 24 to 72 hours. So a virus that existed today will not exist in 3 days. The implications of that are that if they make a vaccine for a flu, 18 months later, that virus is long gone. When I did laboratory work, I took petri dishes that were fertile for cells, and when I put individually virus in those petri dishes, the virus did not multiply. They did not so-called what they're saying self-replicate. That's like saying Tide soap self-replicates because it's found in every home. Viruses are everywhere, in every cell. As I said, about 300,000 varieties, just intercellularly, for specific tissue. If you dissolve more than one type of tissue at a time, then of course the whole cell could be compromised. And that's what the pharmaceutical industry, of course, wants you to believe, that it's willy-nilly and they'll just dissolve everything within a cell. They show you the dissolution of that part, and then they make it into this B Hollywood movie horror episode, which has nothing to do with reality. When I introduced cells into the petri dish with the viruses, of course, the petri dish fertilized to keep cells alive doesn't mean it's a correct environment. And it's not a correct environment. It's a very toxic circumstance. It is nothing like what the blood serum is. So, of course, that cell is going to become compromised. It's going to start manifesting a virus to help clean itself, because in the particular solution that's in the petri dish, the body can't maintain bacteria, it can't maintain parasites, and it can't maintain fungus. Sometimes it can maintain fungus or maintain fungus, but that's rarely. So what you have is an environment of a cellular environment where the cell can't cleanse itself with the help of the symbiotic relationship with bacteria, parasites, and fungus. And the cells always try to cleanse and heal themselves and stay alive. That's why we can do so many abusive things to our bodies with diet and in the environment, and still survive and maintain. Maybe not well and full of disease, but we still seem to exist. Cells in that petri dish will multiply the virus. The virus are created within the cells. And of course, once they've done the work, they get expelled, excreted, secreted from the cells themselves. So then you find a mass amount of virus in the petri dish. But remember that viruses are not alive. They cannot multiply. They cannot self-replicate. Can Tide soap self-replicate? No. We make it. Cells make virus. Once you understand that properties of cleansing, you will not be afraid of what is going on when there's a disease, illness, or sickness. You will let it have its course. The diet. Now, what I found is that, and you'll look in any science book and it'll tell you that fats contain most of the poisons that are in the body. Fat is very important in our polluted society. 100 years ago, when there wasn't much disease, even though there is said to have been a lot of disease, there wasn't a lot of disease. In fact, in 1957, when I was 10 years old, now it's 1 in every 2.5, according to Samuel Epstein, an MD who's one of the world's greatest experts on cancers. Fat is very, very important. Now, we can look at different sources of fat, And when we look at sources of food at all, we have to take a look at our digestive tract. Vegetarians will say, oh, we're like the frugivore and we should eat a lot of fruit like the primates. Now, the apes don't eat a lot of fruit. They do eat a lot of green bananas, unripe. And if you've ever tried to eat a green banana, it's almost impossible. It's very alum-y. It makes the mouth pucker and dry, and they do fine with it. They're acclimated to it, and it's not high in sugar. So it doesn't have the effect like it does with the monkeys that makes them crazy, erratic. The killer monkeys will go on a binge of eating fermented fruit like figs about 24 hours before they go on their killing spree, and then they kill anything that they find, other monkeys, rodents, anything they will kill. And that's that high sugar reaction in their brain and nervous system. Let's start in the mouth. Now, herbivores, animals who eat vegetation, have all molars. In our mouth, we have a few molars in the back for crushing, but almost all of our teeth are cutting. Sure, they cut into fruit, but it doesn't take much to cut into fruit. We also have 4 canines for ripping and tearing. If we travel down into the stomach, we find that we have a concentration of hydrochloric acid. Now, hydrochloric acid isn't needed for vegetation, or very little is needed for vegetation. None is needed for fruit. So why do we have such a concentration of hydrochloric acid if we're not to be flesh eaters and dairy eaters? Now, the concentration of hydrochloric acid in the carnivores, such as the canines and felines, they have 15 times the amount, relatively, in their stomachs. And they have a very short digestive tract. Food passes in there through their systems in 10 to 15 hours. Our small intestine secretes hydrochloric acid all throughout intestines in small amounts, but it's equal to that of any carnivore, any other carnivore. If we eat vegetation, what happens to that hydrochloric acid? It neutralizes it. Well, why would our bodies be producing it if we were meant to be vegetarians? We have lots of bacteria, and almost all of that bacteria, salmonella, various kinds of salmonella. We have almost 2,300 varieties of salmonella in the small intestines that helps us digest food. There are tribes in the world that are still primitive, and they carry the trickworm, the whipworm. The pharmaceutical slant, the medical profession slant on having the trickworm. They say it's a disease and call it trichinosis. All the cultures who live with the trickworm in their intestines thrive. They have no digestive difficulties. So the trickworm is something that we should still have, but we don't. It pre-digests the food for us, breaks it down, just like salmonella and other digestive bacteria and our acids. If you look at the work of Joel Weinstock, Dr. Joel Weinstock, gastroenterologist from the University of Iowa, he showed that giving the whipworm to his patients that had inflammatory bowel syndrome, IBS, that they completely were asymptomatic within 5 to 6 days. After incubation of the whipworm in their intestines. And he found also that the pigs who were too clean at the university and very sick when he introduced the whipworm there, that the pigs got well and they digested fine. So a lot of things you're taught to be afraid of, you should not be afraid of. These we have coexisted with for millions of years that the human body has been around. All the chemicals that are introduced in our society have only been around for 80 years. Some of them, of course, for a couple of hundred years, but not to the variety that we have now, which is something like 60,000 new chemicals we've produced in the last 50 years. So expecting our bodies to adapt to these chemicals is quite an extraordinary feat of the imagination, but the pharmaceutical industry and the industries in general want us to believe that so that we'll continue consuming their products. A vegetarian animal also has a digestive tract 2.5 times longer than ours, the herbivores. They pass food through in 48 hours. We pass food through in 24 hours. They have 60,000 times more enzymes to disassemble the cellulose molecule to get the fat and the protein from it. But you look at any fecal matter from an herbivore and you'll see it is still 30 to 35, even 40% pulp, fibers that they still haven't digested. And we're told that we digest vegetation, but we don't. What vegetation does in our systems is as our system breaks it down the little that it can, these alkaline juices are produced and they neutralize the hydrochloric acid and stun and make immobile and non-functional the acidic bacteria that would normally digest meats and dairy. I, of course, was a vegetarian. I went through many stages of diets to learn what I learned. And then when I was so confused and not many things were working consistently, I had to say, okay, I'm going to test all of these things, and what works I'm going to embrace, what doesn't I'm going to discard. So to make a long story short, as I went through all these different stages of diets, from partially cooked, believing that you had to eat vegetables and they had to be cooked to be digested, which is true, but then you have lots of toxins and free radicals when you cook a food. Raw foods are best. They have lots of enzymes. Enzymes are not alive. People think like virus. Enzymes are alive. Many people say live enzymes, but enzymes are just like virus. They're protein bodies that either construct or destruct. They either decompose or they help build. In the raw foods, we get lots of them that are in a particular shape. And of course, our pancreases are majorly responsible for the recombining of those for human cells. The vitamins are altered starting at about 118 degrees. They're all incapacitated. In other words, they don't do what they're meant to do by the time you reach 127. Enzymes, they are fractionated, and then they don't have the same ability to construct and deconstruct. Raw foods will provide with more nutrients. There are varieties of toxins that are formed from cooking foods. In my book, The Recipe for Living Without Disease, in the last 50 pages, I named the major ones that we've identified, but that's only like 36 of them. And there are many, many more that, of course, are much smaller than those that we've identified. So if you want a list of those, they're in my book. So let's get back to fats. Digesting fats is more time-consuming than digesting any other nutrient. The liver is responsible for making the bile that helps fractionate the fat molecules to be reassembled for cholesterols or distributed around. Cholesterols are fats. No food contains cholesterols. Basically, our body takes fats, breaks them down with bile, varieties of bile, just like you have varieties of virus. You have varieties of bile that fractionate the fat molecules to help them be reassembled with enzymes in a particular cholesterol form. and we use about 60 varieties of cholesterols. A third are used for lubrication, a third are used for energy and building, and the other third are used to make virus and other solvent compounds to dissolve toxicity and neutralize it in the body. So fats are very, very, very important in our society. I have found that butter is probably the most effective and important to help people get well, especially when it's in a combination with unheated honey. So raw, unsalted fat, raw, unsalted butter is the primary source of quicker healing. If we take a look at the finest, most easily digestible fat, I would have to say it's in the egg. Eggs, in the high protein in the egg white, our bodies digest those in about 23 minutes. And no other food can be digested that quickly. Milk takes at least, warm milk, takes at least 6 hours to digest, whereas eggs digest in about 23 minutes. And I've given some case histories in my books, We Want to Live and the Recipe for Living Without Disease, that demonstrate. I'll just give you one example. An MD called me from the East Coast about 10 years ago, and she said, I have an emphysemic patient that was diagnosed about 7 years ago. She's been on machines and mainly bedridden for the last 2 years, and she's most likely going to die this weekend. And I said, well, you're calling me a little late, aren't you? And she said, well, I'm a doctor. I have my family's welfare to think of, and, as doctors, we're not allowed to suggest anything other than medical procedures until the patient has suffered and not improved for 10 years. The only thing I can suggest that you do is get 10 to 15 dozen raw eggs and put one at her bed table and ask her to eat one as often as she can. This is on Thursday night. Then I got a call on Monday morning by a very raspy voiced woman who said, the eggs worked, what else do I eat? And I said, well, who are you? So she explained who she was. And I told her to eat some raw meat, but mainly focus on eggs, because if you have that bad of a disease that you're ready to die, you need to concentrate on cleansing and healing and very little on digestion. So eggs are your best bet for cleansing and healing, because they're so easy to digest. However, eggs alone will cause tremendous fat loss and weight loss if you're not eating a tremendous amount. And that emphysemic woman ate 33 a day on Saturday and Sunday, so she ate 66 in those 2 days. Of course, she wouldn't have lost any weight with 33. If you have, let's say, 22 a day, you're not going to lose weight unless you're a very large man or a very large woman, and of course you're going to lose weight. But eggs in combination with milk, like for milkshakes and honey, a little extra cream, very, very nutritive, efficient, and will also help build weight on the body. Cream is the only fat that feeds the brain and nervous system. Butter does not, but a micro amount. Cream, for some reason, when the body breaks it down, and it takes a long time to digest cream. There are many more varieties of bile that are required to break down, and many different varieties of cholesterol formed from cream as opposed to butter. However, butter is more efficient to lubricate and cleanse and give strength to every other cell in the body except for the brain and nervous system. Other fats that can be used would be pressed oils, but we have to be very careful. Those are very isolated nutrients. Oils are very low in nature in lettuce, maybe 2-3%. In olives, you have a tremendous amount of fat, probably a good 50-60% ratio calorie-wise in olives. However, your vegetable oils and olive oil long enough crystallize in the human body. The herbivore stays about 101 to 105 degrees. The human gets about 98.6 and lower. So what happens with vegetable oils in the human body, if they are made as part of the cells, they have a tendency to crystallize at that temperature, at the lower temperature. So we'd have to be in constant fever to utilize those fats properly. There's another fallacy produced by industry, the medical profession, the USDA, and the FDA, that animal fats, that meat fats, cause arteriosclerosis and heart disease. When in the tribes that eat meat, that mainly eat meat like 90% of their diet, cooked cholesterols are not our problem if they're from animal fats. Saturated fats are not our problem unless they're highly cooked. Then they can cause gout and other diseases, like the tribes who do eat cooked meats. They have gout, they have osteoporosis, kidney problems, and bladder irritations. But they don't have any severe diseases that we have, like cancers. The tribes who eat all raw, like or at least 90% raw, like the Fulani, who used to live 90% on milk and dairy products. No diseases, not even dental caries. Eskimos, 90% animal matter, all raw. No arteriosclerosis, no heart disease, no cancers, no dental caries. The first Eskimo to be diagnosed with cancer was in 1936, and that was after about 80 years of the Eskimos who lived with the colonies eating cakes and sugar and developed those diseases. Any pressed oil is a very concentrated oil. You only have oil-soluble fats and activity in them. When you have a whole food, then you have the variety of water and oil-soluble fats and vitamins and enzymes, and in a higher proportion that meets our body's standards and needs. We need a lot more water-soluble vitamins and enzymes than we do oil-solubles. As a treatment for a very serious disease, the concentrated fats can be a great benefit to deal with all the toxicity that's breaking down tissue in our bodies. Raw meats, that includes red meat, fish, seafoods, and fowl, are the only proteins that I've seen able to regenerate brain and nerve tissue. Additionally, the raw meats help regenerate tissue much quicker and in greater quantities. I found that eating mainly animal products is the most efficient. Very little carbohydrate is important because the body produces advanced glycation end products and uses carbohydrates as glycogen. When the body uses a protein sugar like pyruvate in conjunction with glucagon to make glycogen, there's very little advanced glycation end product produced. Now, Columbia University found that in the human body, 70 to 90% of that advanced glycation end product stores forever in the system, creating a very sticky environment in the system, advancing it toward high yeast infections, lots of fungus, lots of brittle tissue, dry tissue. So we need to minimize the amount of sugars that we consume. Honey is a good one that does not convert because when the bee collects the nectar, it swallows it. It pre-digests it. It makes an insulin-like substance or several varieties of insulin-like substances which convert the carbohydrates in the honey into enzymes for digesting mainly protein and fats, which is exactly what we need. So that is a high carbohydrate food that does not create a lot of advanced glycation end products, as other high carbohydrates do. So we need to alkalinize the blood fairly well from eating, a highly acidic diet if you're going on the Primal diet, eating mainly dairy and meats and eggs. So vegetable juice, mainly green vegetable juices, are the things to consume to keep the blood a little bit alkalinized because of the toxicity we have in our systems. Then eating meats, of course, and then the dairy will take care of almost everything else. We can use a little bit, because we're so toxic, we can use a little bit of fruit once a day to help cleanse the body, to make the alcohols necessary, to make the viruses, and to break down fats a little bit better to be utilized as cleansers. Alcohol is in the body is necessary to make viruses, to make other soaps in conjunction with the fats, but it's mainly fats that are utilized to cleanse the body. Now we're getting short on time here, so I'm going to try to make as brief as possible. So what I suggest is a diet. Start the day off with a little vegetable juice. Then, to make sure that you keep the brain as alert and focused as possible, you want to minimize the amount of carbohydrates from the advanced glycation end products that are produced, making the neurological fluid in the blood sticky and the lymphatic system sticky. So you will keep much more focused mind if you keep your carbohydrates very low and don't eat your fruit meal until in the afternoon. So you have a meat meal in the morning, always with fat. So that way you won't burn, you won't alter your proteins into fat. Now the body can take a carbohydrate and make a protein out of it, can make an acetate out of it, which is fat, an acetone, but it is a very complex process, and it isn't as easy and efficient. When you're talking about helping people who are ill or want to be the most efficient in sports, you have to minimize digestive time. You have to minimize the energy that the body puts out in digestion. Therefore, you want to consider foods that are already easily altered into what we need them. So, of course, eating butter with the meat meal reduces the chance that the body will take the protein and make it into a fuel, either too much pyruvate, which is a protein sugar, or too much acetate, which is a fat. So you have a little bit of butter with your meat meal. Then several hours later, you have a milkshake just to calm the body and relax it. And then about 2 to 3 hours later, another vegetable juice. And then an hour or two later, your fruit meal. And always eat fruit with fruit with fat. Always eat fruit with fat because you want to slow those carbohydrates down. And remember that the body needs very little carbohydrates, only like 5% of your diet for carbohydrates to make alcohols, to help utilize fat as energy and as soap in every other function that the body utilizes with fat, and binding with poisons and holding on to it. So you have to have your fruit and fat together, then several hours, 2-3 hours later, have another vegetable juice. Then maybe an hour to 2 hours later, have another meat meal. Then before you go to bed, have maybe a cup of milk, warm milk. If you drink milk cold, there's a problem. A lot of people think that dairy is a very bad thing. However, dairy was even used by Hippocrates to completely reverse emphysema, bronchitis, tuberculosis, diabetes, and a completely raw milk diet. So the fallacies about dairy being a bad thing is not a correct, is not a realistic, scientifically proved myth. It's just a myth. If you look at my report that Dr. Douglas and I wrote it, and he allowed me to use his research and his voice, the report in favor of natural milk or the report in favor of raw milk. They were written in two different forms, those two different names. And you'll see all the history on how raw milk has helped. Pasteurized milk, your calcium is cauterized, a lot of your nutrients are cauterized, and yes, people are allergic to it. Many people are allergic to it. But I've only found about 1% of all those people who have allergies to pasteurized milk still have an allergy to raw milk. And that may be a temporary thing, and I tell how to get beyond that within my recipe book. To get beyond that milk allergy so that you can consume delicious dairy, it's like ice cream and cheesecakes and things like that offer in my recipe book. Also, you want to drink milk or have eggs or have meat during the night. When you go 5 hours without eating, because we're so toxic, I assume, that the red blood cells become cannibalistic and eat each other to get the protein. Even if you were 700 pounds, that would mainly be fat and water weight, but you would still lack protein. So by getting up during the night and having something to eat, you're going to prevent the anemia that is caused every day when people go 5 hours without eating during the night. So people wake up anemic in the morning. They're listless. They're lethargic. So they go for some kind of caffeine or other stimulant, whether it's soda, coffee, or chocolate, whatever it might be, or a high sugar dose to raise their blood sugar. Because the blood cells have been consumed, and in a 3-hour period you could lose up to 5-8 tablespoons of red blood cells. That's severe anemia. So to avoid that, what you can do is, if you're a hyperactive person and you wake up after 5 hours and drink some raw milk or eat some raw eggs and you can't go back to sleep, then the best thing to do is set your alarm for 3 hours, get up and eat something at that time, then you have 5 hours to sleep before you eat again, and that's much more efficient. So that's this course. It was a crash course. I've never given such a crash course before. A little befuddled in some of this delivery because I felt slightly rushed. But there you have it. If you're interested in more of my work, you can get my book, We Want to Live, subtitled The Primal Diet. Then my other book, The Recipe for Living Without Disease. To read more about my work, you could also go to www.wewanttolive, the title of my first book. But the T-O, the We Want to Live, the T-O is the number 2. So it's We Want to, number 2, live. wewanttolive.com. And then you can read that. There's lots of testimonials, and there's a lot more information, and also ways to order the books. So everyone, I hope you enjoy your courses and that you develop into very wonderful healers. Thank you, and have a great year.